Rachel Williams stared at her phone screen, reading the text message for the third time. Her babysitter, Mrs. Chen, was sick with the flu and couldn't watch her son today. Rachel's fingers trembled as she typed back a quick response wishing her well, but inside panic was already building in her chest. It was barely 6 in the morning and she had to be at work by 8:30. There was nobody else to call. She looked over at her 6-year-old son, Tommy, still sleeping peacefully in his small bed. His brown hair was messy across the pillow, and his favorite stuffed dinosaur was tucked under his arm. Rachel felt her throat tighten. She was a single mother working at Davidson Accounting Services, a company that handled finances for dozens of small businesses across the city. She'd been there for 3 years, always on time, always reliable, always willing to stay late when they needed her. But bringing a child to work? That was against company policy. She knew that much. Rachel sat on the edge of her bed, running through her options. Her mother lived 4 states away. Her sister was on a business trip in Chicago. The emergency daycare center downtown charged $75 a day, money she simply didn't have until her paycheck came in on Friday. Rent was due in 3 days and her bank account was already running dangerously low. She'd been stretching every dollar, shopping at discount grocery stores, skipping her own lunches to make sure Tommy had everything he needed. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the old refrigerator in the kitchen. Rachel made her decision. She would bring Tommy to work and hope nobody noticed. Maybe she could set him up in the break room. Maybe he could stay quiet in the corner of her cubicle. It was risky, but what choice did she have? Missing work meant missing pay, and missing pay meant falling behind on bills they couldn't afford to fall behind on. She woke Tommy gently, explaining that today would be different, that he'd be coming with her to her office. The boy rubbed his eyes and looked confused but excited. He'd never been to his mom's workplace before. Rachel packed his backpack with coloring books, crayons, some small toys, and snacks. She reminded him again and again that he needed to be very quiet, that this was important, that they were doing something they weren't really supposed to do. The morning bus ride felt longer than usual. Tommy pressed his face against the window, watching the city wake up around them. Other passengers squeezed into the crowded space, most of them looking tired, heading to their own jobs. Rachel kept one arm around her son, holding him close while her mind raced with worry. What if someone complained? What if her manager found out? But she pushed those thoughts away, one problem at a time. When they arrived at the Davidson building, a tall gray structure downtown, Rachel took Tommy's hand and led him through the revolving doors. The security guard at the front desk, George, looked up from his newspaper and smiled. He'd always been friendly, often asking Rachel about her day when she came in each morning. But today his smile faded slightly when he saw the small boy beside her. "Everything okay?" George asked, his voice kind but cautious. Rachel forced a smile. "My babysitter got sick. Just for today. He'll be quiet, I promise." George hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Good luck," he said, and there was something in his tone that made Rachel's stomach drop. He knew this wasn't allowed. He was being kind by not saying anything, but that didn't mean others would be. They took the elevator to the 4th floor where Rachel's cubicle was located. The office was already buzzing with activity. Phones were ringing, keyboards were clicking, and people were moving between desks with files and coffee cups. Rachel guided Tommy to her small workspace, tucked in the corner near the window. She pulled out her extra chair and set him up with his coloring books. "Remember what I said?" she whispered, kneeling down to his eye level. "Very quiet, okay? If you need me, just tap my arm, but no loud talking." Tommy nodded seriously, understanding that this was important to his mom. He opened his dinosaur coloring book and picked out a green crayon, settling into his task with the focus that only a 6-year-old could manage when trying to be on their best behavior. For the first hour, everything seemed fine. Rachel tried to focus on the quarterly reports spread across her desk. She had 3 client accounts to review before the afternoon meeting, and the numbers weren't making sense. One of the accounts was showing discrepancies that she needed to track down. Her fingers moved across the keyboard, pulling up spreadsheets, cross-referencing invoices, trying to ignore the nervous flutter in her stomach. Tommy was being perfect. He colored quietly, occasionally looking up at his mother with a small smile. He ate the crackers she'd packed without making a mess. When he needed to ask something, he whispered so softly that nobody else could hear. Rachel felt a surge of love and gratitude for her son. He was trying so hard to help her, But around 10:30, things started to fall apart. Rachel's coworker, Beth, walked past the cubicle and stopped dead in her tracks when she saw Tommy. Her eyes went wide and she opened her mouth as if to say something, then closed it again and hurried away. Rachel's heart started pounding. Then another coworker, David, glanced over and did a double take. He frowned but said nothing. The whispers started spreading through the office like ripples across water. Rachel could feel people looking at her, could sense the judgment and curiosity in their glances. She kept her eyes on her computer screen, pretending not to notice, but her hands were shaking so badly she kept making typing mistakes. At 11:15, her desk phone rang. It was Linda from Human Resources, her voice professional but cold. "Rachel, could you come to Mr. Davidson's office, please? Right away." Rachel's world tilted. Mr. Davidson was the owner of the company, a man in his early 60s who rarely interacted with regular employees. She'd seen him maybe 5 times in 3 years, always from a distance. If he was getting involved, this was serious. She looked down at Tommy, who had looked up at the sound of the phone. His small face was innocent, trusting. Rachel wanted to cry but couldn't. Not here, not in front of everyone. She stood up slowly, smoothing down her skirt with trembling hands. "We need to go see someone," she told Tommy softly. "Bring your backpack." The walk to Mr. Davidson's office felt like walking toward an execution. Every step seemed to echo too loudly in the hallway. Rachel's mind was racing through explanations, apologies, pleading words that might save her job. But deep down she knew how this would end. Company policy was company policy. There were no exceptions, no matter how desperate the circumstances. When she reached the heavy wooden door with Mr. Davidson's name on it, Rachel took a deep breath and knocked. "Come in," a gruff voice called from inside. Rachel pushed open the door, holding Tommy's hand so tightly she worried she might hurt him. Mr. Davidson sat behind a massive desk covered in papers and files. He was a large man with gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. When he saw Tommy, those eyes narrowed. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the chairs across from his desk. Rachel sat, pulling Tommy onto her lap, even though there was another chair available. She needed to hold him, needed to feel his warmth against her. Whatever happened next, they were in this together. Mr. Davidson leaned back in his chair, studying them both. The silence stretched out, heavy and uncomfortable. Finally, he spoke. "You know we have policies about children in the workplace. It wasn't a question." Rachel nodded, unable to find her voice. "I understand you've been a good employee," he continued. "Always on time, good work quality. But rules exist for reasons. Insurance liability, workplace disruption, professional standards." He paused, and Rachel could see where this was going. "I'm sorry, but I have to let you go. Effective immediately." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Rachel felt everything inside her go numb. She'd expected it, had known it was coming. But hearing the actual words spoken out loud made it real in a way that terrified her. Fired. She was being fired. 3 years of dedication, of staying late, of skipping lunch breaks to finish projects, all of it meant nothing because she'd made one desperate choice on one desperate morning. Tommy shifted on her lap, sensing his mother's distress even though he didn't understand what was happening. His small hand reached up to touch her face, and Rachel realized tears were running down her cheeks. She wiped them away quickly, trying to hold herself together in front of this man who had just destroyed her life with a few cold sentences. "I understand," Rachel managed to whisper, though her voice cracked on the words. "I'll collect my things." Mr. Davidson nodded, his expression unchanging. He was already looking down at the papers on his desk, moving on to his next task, his next problem. Rachel and her son were already forgotten. Just another administrative issue handled and closed. She stood up, still holding Tommy's hand, and walked out of the office on legs that felt like they might give out at any moment. The walk back to her cubicle was the longest journey of her life. Every person in the office seemed to be watching her. Some looked away quickly when she met their eyes. Others stared openly, their faces showing a mixture of pity and something else, something that looked almost like satisfaction. There was always office politics, always people who resented others for reasons that made no sense. Rachel had tried to stay out of all that, had focused on her work and gone home to her son. But none of that mattered now. Beth was standing near Rachel's cubicle when she got there, pretending to look at something on the bulletin board but obviously waiting. When Rachel started pulling personal items from her desk drawers, Beth finally spoke up. "I'm sorry," she said, though her voice didn't sound particularly sorry. "But you had to know this would happen." "What were you thinking?" Rachel didn't answer. She couldn't trust herself to speak without saying something she'd regret. She pulled out the photo of Tommy from her first day of kindergarten, the coffee mug he'd painted for her last Mother's Day, the small potted plant she'd been keeping alive for 2 years. Her hands moved mechanically, placing items into the cardboard box that Beth had brought over. The box was already prepared, already waiting. How efficient. How professional. Tommy stood beside her, quiet now, his coloring book forgotten. He watched his mother pack with wide, confused eyes. "Mommy, why are we leaving?" he asked softly. "We just are, baby," Rachel said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "It's okay. Everything's going to be okay." But it wasn't okay. Nothing was okay. Rachel's mind was already spinning through the disaster that was about to unfold. Rent was due in 3 days, and she'd been counting on this Friday's paycheck to cover it. Without that money, without a job, she had maybe $400 in her bank account. That might cover groceries for a couple of weeks if she was careful, but it wouldn't cover rent. And finding a new job would take time, maybe weeks, maybe longer. Who would hire a single mother who'd just been fired? They'd want references, and what would Davidson Accounting Services say about her? David walked past without saying anything, his eyes fixed straight ahead as if Rachel had become invisible. Jennifer from accounting stopped and gave her a sad smile but said nothing. Only old George from the front desk seemed genuinely upset when Rachel passed him on her way out. "I'm real sorry," George said quietly, his weathered face creasing with concern. "That's not right. That's just not right." Rachel nodded her thanks, not trusting her voice. She pushed through the revolving doors with Tommy beside her, the cardboard box awkward in her arms. The morning sunshine felt too bright, too cheerful for what was happening. The city around her continued its busy rhythm, people rushing past on sidewalks, cars honking in traffic, delivery trucks making their rounds. The world kept turning, completely indifferent to the fact that Rachel's life had just fallen apart. She stood on the sidewalk outside the building, trying to figure out what to do next. The bus wouldn't come for another 20 minutes. She couldn't afford a taxi. She set the cardboard box down on the ground and pulled Tommy close, needing to feel him against her, needing that reminder of why she kept fighting even when everything seemed impossible. "Are you sad, Mommy?" Tommy asked, looking up at her with those big brown eyes that always saw too much. "A little bit," Rachel admitted, because she'd never believed in lying to her son. "But we're going to be okay. We always figure things out, right?" Tommy nodded, though he looked uncertain. He was 6 years old, but he understood more than most kids his age. He'd had to grow up faster than other children, had learned early that life wasn't always easy, that sometimes there wasn't enough money for the things other kids had, that his mother worked hard and worried a lot. Rachel was about to pick up the box again when she heard footsteps behind her. Fast footsteps like someone was hurrying. She turned around, half expecting to see George coming to offer some final kindness, maybe a good reference or some advice. But it wasn't George. It was a man she'd never seen before, or at least never seen up close. He was tall, maybe in his early 50s, wearing an expensive suit that probably cost more than Rachel made in a month. His hair was graying at the temples, and he had the kind of confident posture that came from years of success. Rachel recognized him vaguely from the few times she'd seen executives from the upper floors moving through the building. He worked on the 8th floor, she thought, in one of those corner offices with the big windows and the leather furniture. The man was walking quickly, his expression intense and focused directly on Rachel. Her first instinct was fear. Was he coming to tell her something else to make the situation even worse somehow? Had she forgotten to sign some termination paperwork? She instinctively pulled Tommy closer, preparing for whatever was coming next. "Wait," the man called out as he got closer. "Please just wait a moment." Rachel froze, her heart pounding. The man reached them, slightly out of breath from hurrying. Up close, she could see that his eyes were kind, despite the intensity of his expression. There was something in his face that reminded her of her own father, long gone now, a gentleness beneath the corporate exterior. "I'm James Patterson," he said. His voice rushed. "I'm the chief operating officer. I saw what happened up there." He gestured toward the building behind them. "I saw you walking out with your son, and I heard about why you were let go." Rachel didn't know what to say. A COO was talking to her, acknowledging her existence, but she couldn't imagine why. Her mind felt foggy, overwhelmed by everything that had happened in the past hour. She just stared at him, waiting for whatever would come next. James looked down at Tommy, then back at Rachel. There was something working behind his eyes, some decision being made in real time. "How old is your son?" he asked. 6. Rachel answered automatically, her voice barely above a whisper. James nodded slowly, and Rachel saw his jaw tighten. He looked back at the building, then at Rachel again. "Would you wait here?" he asked. "Just for 10 minutes. Can you give me 10 minutes before you leave?" Rachel was completely confused now. Wait here? Why? What could possibly happen in 10 minutes that would matter? But there was something in James's voice, an urgency that felt genuine, that made her nod her agreement before she fully understood what she was agreeing to. "Thank you," James said. "Please, just stay right here. I need to talk to Mr. Davidson. This isn't right. This isn't how we should treat people." Before Rachel could respond, James turned and hurried back into the building, moving with purpose. Rachel watched him disappear through the revolving doors, still not understanding what was happening. She looked down at Tommy, who shrugged his small shoulders. "Who was that?" Tommy asked. "I don't know, baby," Rachel said honestly. "I really don't know." They stood on the sidewalk, Rachel holding the cardboard box that contained 3 years of her professional life, while people streamed past them on their way to wherever they were going. Rachel felt suspended in time, caught between the disaster of losing her job and the strange, unexpected interaction with a man she'd never met before. 5 minutes passed. Then 7. Rachel started to feel foolish standing there. What was she expecting? That somehow this executive would march up to Mr. Davidson's office and magically fix everything? That didn't happen in real life. In real life, people like her got fired, and people like James Patterson kept their corner offices and their expensive suits and their comfortable lives. But something kept her there. Some small spark of hope that she couldn't quite extinguish. Maybe it was the look in James's eyes, that intensity that suggested he actually cared about what had happened. Or maybe Rachel was just too tired, too overwhelmed, too broken to make any decisions right now. Even the decision to walk away. 8 minutes. 9. Tommy was getting restless, shifting from foot to foot. "Can we go home now, Mommy?" he asked. "Soon, baby," Rachel promised. "Just a little bit longer." 10 minutes exactly after James had left them, the revolving doors spun again. But this time 3 people came through. James was in front, his expression determined. Behind him was Mr. Davidson, looking angry and uncomfortable. And trailing behind, the 3 people approached her like a small parade, each with a different expression on their face. James looked determined, almost fierce. Mr. Davidson looked like he'd just swallowed something bitter. And Linda from Human Resources looked nervous, her eyes darting between all of them like she wasn't sure what her role in this situation was supposed to be. Rachel felt Tommy press against her leg, sensing the tension in the air. She put her hand on his shoulder, keeping him close while her mind raced through possibilities. Were they coming to make her sign something? Was there paperwork she'd forgotten? Was this about to get even worse somehow? James reached her first, stopping a few feet away with his hands clasped in front of him. When he spoke, his voice was gentler than before, but there was still that intensity underneath. "I've spoken with Mr. Davidson," he said, "and I've convinced him that we need to reconsider the situation." Rachel's heart jumped, but she tried not to let hope take root too quickly. She'd learned the hard way that hope could hurt worse than despair when things fell through. She glanced at Mr. Davidson, whose jaw was tight and whose eyes wouldn't quite meet hers. "What Mr. Patterson means," Linda interjected, stepping forward with her folder, "is that we may have acted too hastily. We'd like to discuss some options with you if you're willing." Rachel looked between the 3 of them, completely lost. Options? What options could there possibly be? She'd broken company policy. She'd been fired. That was final, wasn't it? But James was nodding encouragingly, and even Mr. Davidson was managing a slight nod, though he still looked unhappy about the whole situation. "I don't understand," Rachel said quietly, afraid that speaking too loudly might shatter whatever fragile possibility was forming here. "What's changed?" James and Mr. Davidson exchanged a look, something passing between them that Rachel couldn't interpret. Then James turned back to her, and there was something different in his eyes now, something that looked almost like pain mixed with determination. Would you mind coming back inside? James asked. There's a conference room on the second floor. We can sit down and talk properly. Your son can have some snacks from the break room if that's okay. Rachel hesitated. Part of her wanted to refuse, wanted to hold on to her dignity and walk away from this company that had just humiliated her. But the practical part of her, the part that had to pay rent in 3 days and feed her son, knew she couldn't afford pride right now. If there was even the smallest chance of fixing this disaster, she had to take it. Okay, she said finally. Okay, we'll come back inside. The journey back through the building felt surreal. George at the front desk looked up in surprise as they all walked past him. A few employees who were coming back from lunch breaks stared openly, clearly confused about why the woman who'd just been fired was walking back into the building, flanked by the COO and the owner himself. The conference room on the second floor was small but comfortable, with a long table and chairs that were much nicer than the ones at regular desks. James pulled out a chair for Rachel and she sat down, settling Tommy on her lap again. Linda disappeared and came back moments later with juice boxes and cookies, which she set in front of Tommy. The boy looked at his mother for permission before taking them. Go ahead, baby, Rachel said softly. It's okay. Once they were all settled, an awkward silence filled the room. Mr. Davidson sat at one end of the table, his arms crossed. Linda sat with her folder open, pen ready. James sat across from Rachel, and now that they were in better light, she could see the lines of stress around his eyes, the way his shoulders were tense despite his calm exterior. I need to tell you something, James began, his voice quiet but firm, something I haven't shared with many people in this company. Something that happened to me a long time ago. Rachel listened, confused about where this was going. Mr. Davidson shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly already knowing whatever story James was about to tell. Linda's pen remained still above her paper. 30 years ago, James continued, I was that little boy. He gestured toward Tommy, who looked up from his cookies with curious eyes. My mother was Rosa Patterson. She worked as a night custodian in a law office downtown. My father had left us when I was 3, and my mom was doing everything she could to keep us afloat. Rachel felt something shift in her chest. She leaned forward slightly, drawn into the story despite her confusion about why James was sharing this with her. One night, when I was about your son's age, my mom couldn't find anyone to watch me. Her usual babysitter was sick. Sound familiar? James's smile was sad. So she did what she had to do. She brought me to work with her. I sat in the corner of an office while she cleaned, trying to be quiet, trying to be invisible, just like your son was trying to do today. Tommy had stopped eating his cookies now, watching James with wide eyes. Rachel's hand tightened on her son's shoulder. The senior partner at that law firm, his name was Arthur Goldstein, he found us that night, James continued. I remember my mother's face when he walked in. She looked terrified. Exactly the way you looked when you came out of Mr. Davidson's office today. She thought she was going to lose her job. She thought we were going to lose everything. The room was completely silent now. Even Mr. Davidson had uncrossed his arms and was listening intently, though Rachel suspected he'd heard the story in the past hour. But Mr. Goldstein didn't fire my mother, James said, and his voice cracked slightly on the words. He asked me about school. He asked what I liked to study. I told him I loved math, that I was good with numbers. And instead of seeing a problem, instead of seeing a policy violation, he saw a child who needed help and a mother who was doing her best in an impossible situation. Rachel felt tears building in her eyes again, but these were different from the ones she'd cried earlier. These came from somewhere deeper, from a place that recognized the truth in what James was saying. Over the next few years, Mr. Goldstein became my mentor, James continued. He helped my mother find better work with regular hours and benefits. He helped me apply for scholarships. He wrote recommendation letters when I applied to college. He saw potential in a custodian's son who sat in corners doing homework while his mother worked night shifts. James paused, running his hand through his hair, and Rachel could see emotion working across his face. I went to college on those scholarships. I got a degree in business administration. I worked my way up through several companies. And 15 years ago, I joined Davidson Accounting Services as a junior manager. I worked hard and I moved up, and eventually, I became the COO. He looked directly at Rachel now, and she could see the intensity in his eyes again. that fierce determination that had made him chase her down on the sidewalk. "But here's what I realized today," James said. "I've been so focused on my career, on proving myself, on being successful, that I forgot where I came from. I forgot what it felt like to be that scared kid in the corner, watching his mother try to hold everything together with sheer willpower and determination. And when I saw you walking out of this building with your son, when I heard what had happened, I saw my mother, I saw myself, and I realized that somewhere along the way I'd stopped paying forward the kindness that changed my life." Mr. Davidson cleared his throat uncomfortably. "James came to my office," he said, his voice gruff, "and he told me the story. And he told me something else. He told me that if we didn't make this right, he would resign from his position and make his reasons public." Rachel's eyes widened. James had threatened to quit for her? For someone he'd never even met? "Now I'm a businessman," Mr. Davidson continued, not looking particularly happy about what he was saying. "And I run this company according to policies and procedures. But I'm not stupid. James is the best CO I've ever had. More than that, he made me realize that maybe our policies need some updating. Maybe we need to think more about the human side of business, not just the liability side." Linda finally started writing, her pen moving quickly across the paper. James was watching Rachel carefully, trying to gauge her reaction. Rachel felt overwhelmed, like she was standing in the middle of a storm that had suddenly shifted directions without warning. "What does this mean?" Rachel asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you saying I'm not fired?" "We're saying more than that," James answered. "We're saying we were wrong. We're saying that a good employee who's faced with an impossible situation shouldn't be punished for doing what she had to do to survive. We're saying that we want you back with an apology and full back pay for today." Rachel felt the room spin slightly. She looked down at Tommy, who was watching her with those big eyes, not fully understanding what was happening but sensing that something important was unfolding. "But more than just bringing you back," James continued, "we're going to implement some changes. Real changes. We're going to create an emergency childcare policy. We're going to add flexibility for parents who face unexpected situations. We're going to make sure that what happened to you this morning never happens to anyone else who works here. This will take time to implement properly," Linda added, her professional voice returning. "But we're committed to making Davidson Accounting Services a more family-friendly workplace. You'll be part of helping us develop these policies if you're willing. Rachel Koo." Rachel wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, not caring anymore about maintaining her composure in front of these people. Tommy reached up and patted her cheek, the way she always did for him when he was upset. The simple gesture from her son almost broke her completely. She took a shaky breath, trying to pull herself together enough to respond. "I don't know what to say," Rachel admitted, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you doesn't seem like enough." "You don't need to say anything right now," James replied. "Take the rest of the day. Go home, be with your son, and think about everything. Come back tomorrow morning if you're ready. Your desk will be waiting for you and we'll start fresh." Mr. Davidson stood up, clearly ready to end this meeting and get back to his normal routine. But before he left, he looked at Rachel with something that might have been respect in his eyes. "James is right," he said gruffly. "We made a mistake today. We'll do better." Then he walked out, leaving Linda to handle the paperwork details. Linda spent the next few minutes explaining the practical aspects. Rachel would receive full pay for the day, including the hours she'd worked before being let go. Her employment record would show no termination, no disciplinary action. It would be as if this morning had never happened, at least on paper. In her heart, Rachel knew she'd never forget it, but having it erased from her official record meant everything for future job security. When Linda finally left to file the paperwork, it was just Rachel, Tommy, and James in the conference room. The executive looked tired now, as if telling his story had drained something from him. He sat back in his chair, his expensive suit rumpled from the morning's drama. "Can I ask you something?" Rachel said quietly. Tommy had gone back to his cookies, content now that the tension in the room had eased. "Of course," James answered. "You said Mr. Goldstein helped you. What happened to him? Did you ever get to thank him?" James's expression grew sad, and Rachel immediately regretted asking. But he answered anyway, his voice soft with memory. "He passed away 10 years ago," James said. "Cancer. I visited him in the hospital near the end. He was in his 80s by then, still sharp as ever despite the illness. I told him what his kindness had meant to me, how it had changed the entire trajectory of my life. You know what he said? Rachel shook her head, listening intently. He said he barely remembered that night. James continued with a small laugh. To him, it was just one moment of basic human decency, among thousands of similar moments throughout his career. He said he'd always believed that success wasn't about how much money you made or how high you climbed, but about how many people you helped along the way. He said kindness was the only thing we take with us when we go, the only thing that really matters in the end. James's eyes were distant, lost in the memory. I've thought about those words every day since he died. But somehow in the day-to-day grind of corporate life, I let them fade into the background. I got caught up in quarterly reports and profit margins and efficiency metrics. I stopped seeing people and started seeing human resources, productivity units, potential liabilities. He focused on Rachel again, and she could see regret in his expression. Until this morning when I saw you walking out with your son, suddenly, it was like someone had thrown cold water in my face. I saw myself and my mother and you and Tommy, and I realized I'd become exactly what I never wanted to be. Someone who enforces policies without considering the people those policies affect. Rachel didn't know what to say to that. She'd always thought of executives as untouchable, as people who lived in a different world where money and power solved all problems. It had never occurred to her that someone like James might struggle with the same doubts and regrets that kept her awake at night. My mother is still alive, James continued, a smile breaking through his sadness. She's 78 now, retired, living in a nice apartment that I help her pay for. She worked so hard for so many years and she never complained, never asked for help from anyone. When I told her this morning what had happened, what I'd done, you know what she said? What? Rachel asked. She said, it's about time. She said she'd been waiting for years for me to remember where I came from, to use my position to help people instead of just maintaining systems. She said Mr. Goldstein would be proud. James's voice cracked slightly on the last sentence, and she said she was proud too. Tommy had finished his cookies and was starting to get restless, swinging his legs under the chair. Rachel knew they should probably leave soon, let James get back to his work. But there was something she needed to understand first. What you did today, Rachel said carefully. Threatening to quit if they didn't bring me back, that was a huge risk. What if Mr. Davidson had called your bluff? What if he'd accepted your resignation? James shrugged, and for a moment he looked younger, less burdened by the weight of his position. It wasn't a bluff, he said simply. I meant every word. If Davidson Accounting Services was the kind of place that fired single mothers for doing their best in impossible situations, then it wasn't a place I wanted to work anymore. Sometimes you have to be willing to lose everything to stand up for what's right. Rachel felt something shift inside her, something that went beyond gratitude. She was seeing a different kind of strength than she'd ever witnessed before. Not the strength of enduring hardship, which she knew well, but the strength of using privilege and position to help others, even at personal risk. It was humbling and inspiring at the same time. I should let you get back to work, Rachel said, standing up with Tommy. You've probably got 100 things to do, and I'm sure this morning has put you behind schedule. James stood as well, but he didn't move toward the door. Instead, he pulled out his wallet and extracted a business card, holding it out to Rachel. This has my direct office line and my email, he said. If you ever need anything, if anyone gives you trouble about the new policies we're implementing, if you face any retaliation for what happened today, you contact me immediately. Understood? Rachel took the card, feeling the weight of what it represented. A direct line to the COO. Most employees worked their entire careers without ever speaking to someone at that level, and here she was being given personal access. Thank you, she said again, knowing the words were inadequate but not having better ones. And one more thing, James added, his tone becoming more serious. I'm going to need your help with these new policies we're creating. You understand the challenges working parents face better than anyone in management. I want you involved in designing the solutions. It won't be extra work on top of your regular job. I'll make sure you have time allocated for it. But your perspective is crucial if we're going to do this right. Rachel felt overwhelmed again. An hour ago, she'd been fired. Now she was being asked to help shape company policy. It was too much to process. Too big a swing from disaster to opportunity. But she nodded, accepting the responsibility even as her mind reeled from the implications. As they walked toward the elevator, Tommy between them holding both their hands. James spoke again. "You know what the hardest part about Mr. Goldstein's lesson was?" He asked. "What's that?" "Knowing when to use the power you've been given," James said thoughtfully. "When you're successful, people tell you that you earned your position through hard work and merit. And that's partially true. I did work hard, but I also got lucky. I got lucky that Mr. Goldstein was the one who found my mother that night, not someone else who might have fired her immediately. I got lucky that I was born with a brain that's good at math and business. I got lucky in 100 small ways that I didn't even recognize until much later." The elevator arrived and they stepped inside. George waved from the front desk as they passed, looking relieved to see Rachel coming back through the building as a restored employee rather than a fired one. "Once you understand that luck plays such a huge role in success," James continued as they walked toward the exit, "you start to see that you have a responsibility to pass that luck forward, not out of guilt or obligation, but because it's the only way the system ever gets better. If everyone who succeeds just hoards their resources and protects their position, then the same people stay stuck at the bottom forever. But if people who make it remember to reach back and help others climb up, then gradually, the whole structure improves." They reached the revolving doors, and James held one section still so Rachel could guide Tommy through safely. Outside, the afternoon sun was bright and the city noise rushed in around them. Rachel turned to face James one last time. "I'm going to make you proud," she said firmly. "I'm going to be the best employee this company has, and I'm going to help make sure other people don't go through what I went through this morning." James smiled, a genuine warm smile that transformed his whole face. "You're already making me proud," he said. "Just by being a good mother who's doing her best in tough circumstances. That's all anyone can ask. Everything else is bonus." As Rachel walked away with Tommy heading toward the bus stop for their journey home, she felt different than she had that morning. The fear was still there. The financial stress hadn't magically disappeared, and she knew there would be awkward moments when she returned to work tomorrow. But underneath all that, there was something new. Hope. Real hope, not just desperate wishful think. Walking into Davidson Accounting Services the next morning felt completely different from every other time Rachel had entered that building. George at the front desk greeted her with a huge smile and a thumbs up. Several co-workers who'd witnessed yesterday's drama came by her cubicle to welcome her back, some apologizing for not speaking up when it happened, others just expressing relief that things had worked out. Even Beth, who'd been so judgmental the day before, stopped by with a quiet apology. "I was wrong," Beth said, not quite meeting Rachel's eyes. "I was thinking about rules instead of thinking about people. I'm glad you're back." Rachel accepted the apology gracefully, understanding that fear made people do and say things they didn't mean. Everyone in that office was just trying to protect their own position, worried that any deviation from the rules might threaten their own security. She couldn't fault them for that, even if it had hurt in the moment. But the real changes started in the weeks that followed. James was true to his word. He scheduled meetings with Rachel and several other working parents in the company, asking about their biggest challenges. Rachel found herself sitting in conference rooms she'd never entered before, sharing her experiences with people from human resources and management. At first, she felt intimidated, worried about saying the wrong thing or overstepping her position. But James encouraged her to be honest, to hold nothing back. "We can't fix problems we don't understand," he told her during one of these meetings. "And we can't understand them unless people like you are willing to tell us the truth, even when that truth is uncomfortable." So Rachel told them everything. She talked about the constant stress of balancing work and childcare. She explained how expensive emergency daycare was, how it could eat up a whole day's wages. She described the guilt that came with leaving a sick child with a babysitter so she could come to work, the fear of missing important school events, the exhaustion of trying to be everything to everyone and feeling like she was failing at all of it. Other parents shared their stories too. Kevin from the IT department talked about having to choose between attending his daughter's dance recital and finishing a project deadline. Patricia from accounting described the panic of getting called by her son's school because he was sick and needed to be picked up, knowing she had a client meeting in 20 minutes. Robert, one of the senior accountants, quietly admitted that he'd been secretly working from home some days when his wife was out of town, and he couldn't find childcare, terrified someone would find out and he'd lose his job. James listened to all of it, taking notes, asking questions, his expression growing more serious with each story. After the third meeting, he scheduled a presentation for all senior management. Rachel wasn't in that meeting, but she heard about it from Linda in HR, who said James had been forceful in a way she'd rarely seen. He told them we were losing good employees because of rigid policies, Linda explained. He showed them the numbers, how many people had left in the past 5 years, how much it cost to recruit and train replacements. He made a business case for flexibility, but more than that, he made a moral case. He said if we wanted to be the kind of company that attracted top talent, we needed to be the kind of company that treated people like human beings, not just resources. The new policies rolled out over the next 2 months. Davidson Accounting Services established an emergency child care fund that employees could access when their regular arrangements fell through. They partnered with a local daycare center to reserve spots for emergency situations. They implemented flexible start times, allowing parents to adjust their schedules for school drop-offs and pickups as long as the work got done. They created a work-from-home policy for situations where coming into the office was impossible, but the work could still be completed remotely. Not everyone was happy about the changes. Some of the older managers grumbled about coddling employees and lowering standards. A few people without children complained that parents were getting special treatment. But James stood firm, explaining in a company-wide email that supporting working parents wasn't about special treatment, it was about basic fairness. Everyone, he wrote, would face circumstances at some point in their career where they needed flexibility and understanding. These policies would be there for everyone when life got complicated. The changes attracted attention outside the company, too. A local business newspaper ran a story about Davidson Accounting Services' new family-friendly policies, featuring an interview with James. He talked about his mother's experience, about Mr. Goldstein's kindness, about the importance of remembering where you came from. The article quoted him saying something that Rachel cut out and taped to her cubicle wall. Success isn't measured by how high you climb, but by how many people you bring with you. Other companies started reaching out, asking about the policies, wanting to know if they really worked. James gave presentations at business conferences, always bringing Rachel with him to share the employee perspective. She found herself standing in front of rooms full of executives and HR professionals, telling her story, explaining why these policies mattered. It was terrifying at first, speaking in front of so many people, but James was always there encouraging her, reminding her that her voice carried weight because it came from real experience. 6 months after that terrible morning when Rachel thought her world was ending, the company held a special event. They'd been recognized by a national organization for innovative workplace policies. There was a ceremony at a hotel downtown, with a dinner and awards presentation. Rachel wore her best dress, the one she saved for special occasions, and brought Tommy along because the invitation specifically included families. James was being honored as an outstanding leader in workplace innovation. When he went up to accept the award, he surprised everyone by asking Rachel to join him on stage. She felt her heart pounding as she climbed the steps, very aware of all the people watching. But when she reached James's side, he handed her the award. "This belongs to you as much as it does to me," he said into the microphone. "It belongs to every working parent who's faced impossible choices, who's been told they have to choose between their job and their family. It belongs to everyone who's had the courage to speak up about unfair systems and demand better. I'm just the person who happened to be in a position to listen and act. The real heroes are people like Rachel, who keep showing up and doing their best even when the system is stacked against them." The room erupted in applause. Rachel stood there holding the award, tears streaming down her face while Tommy watched from their table with wide, proud eyes. She thought about that morning 6 months ago, standing on the sidewalk with a cardboard box, believing her life was over. She thought about all the moments between then and now, all the meetings and conversations and small victories that had led to this moment. After the ceremony, people swarmed around them asking questions, sharing their own stories, expressing gratitude for the changes being made. But the moment that mattered most to Rachel came later, when the crowd had thinned and they were gathering their things to leave. An older woman approached them, moving slowly with the help of a cane. She had gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, and warm brown eyes that reminded Rachel of her own grandmother. The woman went straight to James, and Rachel saw his face transform with joy and surprise. "Mom," he said, wrapping the woman in a gentle hug. You came. I didn't think you'd make the trip. And miss seeing my son honored for doing the right thing? Rosa Patterson said with a smile. Not a chance. She pulled back and looked at her son with obvious pride. Mr. Goldstein would be so proud of you, James. Not for the award, but for remembering the lessons he taught us. Then Rosa turned to Rachel, studying her with those kind eyes. You must be Rachel, she said. James has told me all about you and your boy. Where is he? Rachel called Tommy over and he came shyly, not sure how to act around this new person. Rosa knelt down, though the movement clearly cost her some effort, putting herself at Tommy's eye level. I was like your mother once, Rosa told Tommy gently. Working hard, trying to take care of my boy, scared all the time that I wouldn't be enough. But someone helped us, and that help changed everything. Now your mother is helping to change things for other families. That's important work. You should be very proud of her. Tommy nodded solemnly. I am proud, he said. My mom is the best. Rosa smiled and looked up at Rachel. They always know, she said. Children always know when their parents are fighting for them. Even when things are hard, even when it feels like you're failing, they know you love them. That's what matters most. The four of them stood together in that hotel ballroom, an unlikely group connected by kindness that had rippled across 30 years. Rosa, who had worked night shifts as a custodian and raised her son alone. James, who had climbed from poverty to executive suites but never forgot where he came from. Rachel, who had faced her worst fear and come out stronger. And Tommy, who would grow up knowing that people in positions of power could choose to help instead of hurt, could choose compassion over policy, could choose to see humans instead of human resources. As they left the hotel that night, walking out into the cool evening air, James stopped on the sidewalk. It was almost